Phoenix awoke the next morning to the sound of the breeze snapping the curtains. He felt desperately tired and his head was pounding. It was as though something was probing his mind, draining him of life. He was experiencing a deep, numbing exhaustion. What had the game done to him? It was a quarter of an hour before he was able to swing his legs painfully out of bed and make his way to the bathroom. Washing and brushing his teeth made him feel a little better, and he could finally think. Of course, it's Saturday. The thought started to loosen the hold of his headache. Yes, I can play all day if I want to. He remembered how angry he'd been with Laura for dragging him off it with an uneventful phone call the previous evening. This time, he was going to declare himself out of bounds for the whole day. Nobody, but nobody was getting him off the computer until he was good and ready. Morning, he called to Mum as he made his way downstairs. Is Dad in the study? Whoa, whoa, said Mum, emerging from the kitchen in her toweling dressing gown, a cup of tea and a towel in hand. What's the big rush? The game, Phoenix replied, following her into the kitchen. I'm going to get some breakfast and play. I think you might be in for a bit of a disappointment, said Mum, taking a sip of coffee. Your dad went out about half an hour ago, taking that suit thing with him. He's what? He packed all that game stuff away and chucked it in the car. He must have been working until well after midnight, because I went up to bed at 11:30. Don't ask me what he's up to. He went back to the game after you turned in, and he didn't say a word to me this morning. Suddenly, there was a huge aching space where all of Phoenix's expectations for the day had been. But Pan had only just introduced me to the game. Mum reacted as if she had suffered an electric shock. She seemed to mouth the word Pan. The mug she had been drying fell and smashed to the floor. Look at that, she cried, running her finger under the tap. Now I've cut myself. Phoenix stared in disbelief. What a reaction. I'm sick of hearing about that game, snapped Mum. I wish John had never started it. Phoenix gave her time to calm down. Did he say where he was going? He ventured after a few minutes. You've got to be joking, said Mum. He didn't even have breakfast with me. That father of yours, he's getting worse. And he's taken the lot? Phoenix couldn't believe it. The one day he would have had time to really get into the game. Him, the guinea pig. And Dad had gone off with all the gear. What am I supposed to do all day? Mum smiled. What did you do before you had the game, I suppose? Read, go swimming, call on your friends. This isn't London, Phoenix objected. I've only got one friend here. Call on her then. I'd rather play the Legendeer. That look came into Mum's face, the one she'd worn when she dropped the mug. It was a moment or two before she managed to reply. Oh, stop moaning, she said. It's only a stupid game. Phoenix turned away. Stupid. Nobody who'd play it would say that. The rain had stopped by the time he reached the high street. He'd waited all of 3 hours before giving up on Dad. There was no sign of him, and he hadn't phoned. It was after Phoenix's third minor tiff with Mum that he decided to call on Laura. The sun came out, garish and dazzling on the damp streets. The heat only added to his bad mood. He had a heat rash spreading across his chest. He felt itchy and uncomfortable, and a headache was lurking. He reflected on a lousy morning. Not only was he locked out of the study and unable to play the game, he'd also made an unwelcome discovery in the shed. The back tire of his bike was flat, and there was no puncture kit. Well, looks like I'm walking to Laura's. Or maybe he was running. He caught sight of Steve Adams and his mates making their way past the post office. Perhaps they hadn't seen him. Hey, surprise, surprise, if it isn't Free Knickers! So much for wishful thinking. Get him! There were 5 of them, and they were coming at a run. They fancied the odds, and Phoenix didn't. Not this time. He remembered Laura's warning. Steve carried a knife. You've had it this time, Free Knickers. Phoenix looked hopefully at the Pelican crossing. The news wasn't good. Wait, it told him. Adams was patting his jacket. You haven't got it yet, have you? You're not wanted here. A bluff, Phoenix hoped, but he wasn't about to call it. For once, it wasn't fear that drove him. It was something he'd felt in the labyrinth, the shame of being beaten. You stay right there, Adams ordered. Phoenix fixed his enemy with a stare, 10 yards in closing. He glanced at the crossing, still on wait. The Saturday morning traffic was more dangerous than Adams, but he threw himself into the road nevertheless. He couldn't give Adams the satisfaction of beating him. Behind him he heard warning shouts and a cry of horror. The boy's crazy! He's going to get himself killed! He was dodging and weaving, holding up his hand to the startled and angry drivers. He heard the squeal of brakes, a near miss, but nothing was going to stop him now. Struggling to the middle of the road, he took a gulp of fume-filled air and waved his way to the far pavement. He'd made it, but only thanks to an emergency stop by a private hire taxi. You young idiot! Need their heads looking at, these kids! But Phoenix wasn't hanging around to listen. He had to put some distance between himself and Adams's gang. Without so much as a backwards glance, he ran off, cut through the alleyway between the bank and the church, and scrambled down the embankment on the disused railway line. A quick sprint across the biscuit factory car park, and he was at the corner of Laura's street. The gang wasn't following. But he was out of luck at Laura's too. Nobody was in. Wonderful, he groaned. Absolutely rotten wonderful. He was just turning back into the high street, glancing nervously from right to left for some sign of Adams, when he heard a car horn. It was Dad. You back then? Phoenix said, sliding into the passenger seat. Much as he resented Dad's disappearing act, he kept quiet about it. He didn't want to jeopardize his chance of playing the game again. Dad checked the mirror and glanced over his shoulder before pulling out into the traffic. His voice sounded flat. Something up? You could say that. Phoenix felt a twinge of unease. Has this got something to do with the game? Dad nodded and pulled up at the traffic lights but had just turned red. I had to send the suit back this morning. You did what? Why? Dad rolled up his shirt sleeve to reveal a long scratch on his upper arm. It looked raised and angry. How did you get that? The lights changed to green. That's what I'd like to know. 1 minute I was playing the game, the next there was this burning sensation right down my arm. Phoenix started, remembering the charge of pain that had run through his own body. He still hadn't mentioned it. When the lights changed, Dad drove over the bridge and turned left towards home. But I didn't notice anything sharp. Me neither, but something caused this. One thing's for sure. You're not going to use that game until I've got some assurances about its safety. Phoenix stood on the pavement while Dad locked and alarmed the car. His frustration boiled over. Typical, he snorted. You get a bit of a scratch and you send the whole thing back. Haven't you got any bottle? Look, Dad replied, struggling to contain his temper. All the accessories are made of the same material. I'm not taking any chances. No, you never do. Now that's enough. Phoenix looked at the cut. He hardly cared about the danger. There was something in the game, something hidden and exciting. Playing was all that mattered. You spoiled everything. First you drag us all the way out here to live, then you ruin the only good thing that's happened to me. Phoenix didn't like the sound of his own voice. There was a cruelty he didn't intend. But he was furious with Dad. The game was gone, a game that had started to become part of him. Still fighting to keep a lid on his temper, Dad turned his key in the front door. There was a note from Mum on the hall table. Gone shopping, back in an hour. Dad ran his eyes over the yellow post-it, then turned to face Phoenix. There's something I haven't told you. I can't wait. Just listen to me, will you? Phoenix grimaced. He knew he was being horrible, but he couldn't help it. Okay, I'm listening. I'd got as far as Theseus's journey through the Badlands on the way to Athens. You know where I mean? Yeah, where he has to fight the bandits. That's it. Anyway, I had no problem with most of the bad guys. I got past Perseus, the cudgel man, and Silas, who tried to tie me to a couple of trees and rip me in half. I was having quite a good time wasting them. I was really clocking up the points. A superhero. Then it started to get Weird. Phoenix was intrigued. So intrigued, he forgot he was meant to be angry. How do you mean, weird? Well, at first it was just fun. You know, baddie jumps up, hero kills baddie. The mother of all battles is fun when you know nobody's getting hurt. Then I came to this castle. An old man invited me in. He was called Procrustes. Yes, I know the story. Then you'll know he has this cute habit of tying people to a magic bed. That's right. If you're too short for it, he stretches your limbs. If you're too tall, he... Yes, he cuts off your feet. Well, I wish I'd known about old Procrustes. But you must have known, Phoenix interrupted. You do the storylines. That's what I thought, said Dad. But it appears there's more than one of us working on the plot, even on my levels. I'm not like you and your mother. I skim the legends and pick the exciting bits, the stuff that will make good computer episodes. I'd never heard of Procrustes and his magic bed. Anyway, you know the way you can touch and smell things in the game? Well, it turns out you can eat and drink as well. You're kidding. Oh, believe me, you can, Dad insisted. Every physical sensation seems to have been incorporated into it. I had quite a supper at Procrustes' castle. But the wine must have been drugged because I woke up being tied to the bed. And before you say it, yes, he was going to stretch me. Luckily, my hands were still free and I got loose. Then Procrustes came at me with a razor-sharp cleaver. That's when I felt the pain in my arm. But it's crazy. The game couldn't cut you. Phoenix wasn't so sure. He couldn't get the Minotaur out of his head. The yellow eyes. The bellow that shook the walls, the blood-smeared skin. It's not that he'd wanted to run. He'd had to run. Phoenix was starting to think the game had a life of its own. But he wasn't going to tell Dad that. He still wanted to play it again. Something else he had to do. It was time to placate the old man. Of course not, he said reassuringly. It'll be a sharp thread in the suit. That's all. Dad replied dubiously. I mean, Phoenix said hurriedly, what else could it be? That's just it, Dad answered. I can't imagine. The only thing I know is that something was wrong with the suit, and I'm not taking any risks. I've written to Reed, telling him what I think of the game. You haven't? Oh, I have. I told him I was quite worried about safety. Phoenix relaxed. Quite worried. Was that all Dad could say? With a protest as weak as that, Reed would soon have him singing a different tune. I'm sure it'll be soon sorted out, he said, anxious to play again. Maybe, Dad murmured, gazing thoughtfully into the garden. Phoenix smiled to himself. If he knew Dad, he was bound to do whatever Reed wanted. After all, Dad was no hero.